Copper Creek Calling by Carl Watson. The telegram crumpled in Rebecca Murphy's gloved hands as she stood on the train platform, watching the locomotive disappear into the Colorado Territory morning mist. Around her, the bustling depot of Copper Creek buzzed with miners, merchants, and families, but she felt utterly alone. The yellow paper bore news that would change everything. Her father's general store, the only inheritance left to her name, was drowning in debt. "Miss Murphy?" A deep voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to find a tall man approaching, his weathered hands removing a dusty hat to reveal auburn hair and concerned green eyes. "I'm Samuel Crawford. Your father wrote to me about managing the store's books before he paused respectfully. I'm sorry for your loss." Rebecca studied the man before her. His clothes were well-made but practical, his manner respectful yet confident. She had expected someone older, perhaps with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. Instead, Samuel Crawford possessed the bearing of a man accustomed to both ledgers and hard work. "Mr. Crawford, I appreciate your condolences, but I'm afraid there may be little left to manage." She showed him the telegram. "According to this, the store owes more than it's worth." Samuel's jaw tightened as he read. "With respect, Miss Murphy, telegrams often lack nuance. Might I suggest we examine the actual records before drawing conclusions?" His calm demeanor both irritated and intrigued her. Back in Boston, the gentleman of her acquaintance would have immediately offered empty reassurances or changed the subject entirely. This man seemed prepared to face unpleasant truths head-on. "Very well, Mr. Crawford, lead the way." The walk to Murphy's general store took them down Copper Creek's main thoroughfare, past the barber shop where miners gathered for news, the church where Sunday services drew families from miles around, and the saloon that Rebecca tried not to notice. Samuel pointed out various establishments, his commentary revealing an intimate knowledge of the town's rhythms and relationships. "Your father was well respected here," he said as they paused before a modest wooden building with Murphy's General Store painted in fading letters across the front. "He extended credit when times were hard, never turned away a family in need. That's part of the problem, but also part of the solution." Inside, the store felt familiar yet foreign. Rebecca remembered her father's descriptions in his letters, the shelves lined with everything from fabric to farming tools, the counter where he tallied purchases and dispensed advice in equal measure. Now, in the Colorado morning light, filtering through dusty windows, she could see the reality behind his cheerful correspondence. Gaps on shelves spoke of inventory challenges, and a stack of unpaid invoices sat prominently on the counter. Samuel moved to a desk in the corner and withdrew a leather-bound ledger. "Your father kept meticulous records. The debt is substantial, yes, but look here." He pointed to columns of figures. "Accounts receivable total nearly as much as what's owed. The problem isn't the business model, it's collection and cash flow." Rebecca leaned closer to examine the numbers, acutely aware of Samuel's proximity. He smelled of soap and leather, with a hint of ink that suggested long hours spent with books. When he turned to explain a particularly complex entry, their faces were mere inches apart. For a moment, neither moved. "I see," she said finally, stepping back and hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "But how does one collect from people who genuinely cannot pay?" Carefully and with creativity, Samuel closed the ledger and faced her fully. "May I ask what your plans are, Miss Murphy? Will you be returning to Boston?" The question she'd been dreading. In Boston, she had been a spinster daughter caring for an aging aunt, her own prospects dimming with each passing year. The inheritance of her father's store had seemed like salvation, a chance for independence and purpose. Now, facing financial ruin, those dreams seemed as fragile as the telegram still clutched in her hand. "I had hoped to stay," she admitted, "to continue my father's work. But if the store cannot survive—" "It can survive," Samuel said with quiet conviction. "It will require sacrifice, innovation, and considerable effort, but it can be done. The question is whether you're willing to fight for it." Something in his tone stirred a response she hadn't expected. "Mr. Crawford, you speak as if you have a personal stake in the outcome." Color rose in his cheeks. "Perhaps I do. Your father was kind to me when I arrived in Copper Creek 2 years ago. He gave me work when others saw only a failed businessman from back east. I owe him a debt that extends beyond mere accounting." "Failed businessman?" Rebecca found herself curious about this man's history. Samuel moved to the window, gazing out at the bustling street. "I owned a lumber mill in Pennsylvania. Poor decisions and a dishonest partner cost me everything. I came west hoping to start over, and your father saw potential where others saw only failure. The honesty in his admission touched something deep within Rebecca. Here was a man who understood loss, who had rebuilt himself through determination and the kindness of others. What would you suggest we do first? Though he slipped out naturally, and Samuel's smile in response warmed her more than it should have. First, we inventory everything accurately. Then we visit your father's debtors, not to demand payment, but to understand their situations and explore alternatives. Some might pay with goods or services instead of cash. Others might manage partial payments if given reasonable terms. Rebecca nodded, impressed by his thoughtful approach. And if that proves insufficient? Then we diversify. Copper Creek is growing. The mine output is increasing, new families arrive weekly, and the railroad brings opportunities for expanded trade. Your father stuck to traditional general store offerings, but there's room for expansion. Over the following days, Rebecca discovered that Samuel Crawford was a man of his word. They worked side by side, cataloging inventory, reviewing accounts, and visiting customers throughout the area. Samuel proved adept at reading people, knowing when to be firm and when to show flexibility. More importantly, he treated Rebecca as an equal partner in their efforts, seeking her opinions and respecting her decisions. During a visit to the Hendricks farm, where the family owed for supplies purchased during a difficult winter, Rebecca watched Samuel negotiate with quiet dignity. Mrs. Hendricks, embarrassed by their debt, offered eggs, milk, and vegetables in partial payment. Samuel accepted graciously, then suggested that fresh produce might be exactly what the store needed to attract customers who currently traveled to larger towns for such items. "You have a gift for finding solutions that benefit everyone," Rebecca observed as they drove back to town in Samuel's wagon. "Your father taught me that business is about relationships, not just transactions," Samuel replied. He understood that helping others succeed ultimately ensures your own success. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Colorado landscape, and Rebecca found herself studying Samuel's profile as he concentrated on the road ahead. There was strength in the set of his jaw, kindness in the way he'd spoken to the Hendricks children, and something indefinably appealing about his quiet competence. "Mr. Crawford," she said impulsively, "why have you never married?" The question seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. He was quiet for so long that Rebecca began to regret her boldness. "I suppose I've been waiting for the right woman," he said finally. "Someone who could see past my failures to the man I'm trying to become." "And what sort of man is that?" Samuel glanced at her, his green eyes serious. "One worthy of a good woman's trust and affection." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm, but she held his gaze. "I think you may be closer to that goal than you realize." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities, until the wagon hit a rut and jolted them back to practical matters. Their efforts over the next week began to show results. The store's shelves filled with fresh produce from local farms, paid for through the creative bartering arrangements Samuel had negotiated. Word spread that Murphy's General Store was under new management but maintaining old values, and customers who had stayed away during the uncertainty began returning. Rebecca found herself looking forward to each morning's collaboration with Samuel. He had a way of making even mundane tasks interesting through his observations about human nature and business. When they disagreed, and they did, particularly about extending further credit to struggling families, their discussions were spirited but respectful. "You're too trusting," Samuel warned after Rebecca approved another payment plan for a miner's widow. "And you're too cautious," she countered. "My father built this business on trust and community. I won't abandon those principles for the sake of immediate profit, even if those principles lead to bankruptcy." Rebecca straightened, meeting his challenge directly. "Especially then. What good is financial success if it comes at the cost of our integrity?" Samuel stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head with what might have been admiration. "You're either very wise or very stubborn. Can't I be both?" His laugh was rich and genuine. "I'm beginning to think you can be anything you set your mind to, Miss Murphy." The compliment pleased her more than it should have, and Rebecca found herself wondering what it would be like to hear such words from him under different circumstances, perhaps as something more than a business partner. That evening, as they worked late by lamplight updating the store's records, Rebecca became increasingly aware of Samuel's presence. When he leaned close to point out a discrepancy in the numbers, she caught herself studying the way his hair curled slightly at his collar. the way his long fingers moved across the page with surprising grace. "Rebecca," he said softly, and she realized he'd caught her staring. "Yes?" "There's something I need to tell you." His voice was serious, almost troubled. "About my arrangement with your father." Rebecca's stomach tightened. "What sort of arrangement?" Samuel set down his pen and faced her fully. "He asked me to look after you if anything happened to him, to help you establish yourself here, or to ensure your safe return to Boston if you chose that path." "I see." Rebecca's voice was carefully controlled. "So your assistance has been obligatory?" "No." Samuel's response was immediate and fervent. "It began that way, yes, but it hasn't remained so. What I feel for you now has nothing to do with promises made to your father." "And what do you feel for me now, Mr. Crawford?" The formal address created distance between them, and Samuel noticed immediately. "Don't retreat from me, Rebecca. Not when I'm trying to be honest with you." "Honest about what?" Samuel stood and moved to the window, his back to her. "About the fact that working beside you these past weeks has been the most satisfying time of my life. About how your laugh makes me forget every failure I've ever experienced. About how your determination to honor your father's values while building something new has made me want to be a better man." Rebecca's pulse quickened. "Samuel." He turned to face her, his expression intense. "I know I have little to offer you. My past is checkered, my finances modest, and my prospects uncertain. But if you could see your way clear to considering a partnership that extends beyond business." "Are you proposing to me, Mr. Crawford?" "I'm asking if you might allow me to court you properly, Miss Murphy, with the intention of marriage, if we find ourselves compatible." Rebecca stood, smoothing her skirts to buy time while her thoughts raced. The practical part of her mind cataloged the advantages: Samuel's business acumen, his understanding of the community, his proven loyalty to her father. But those considerations paled beside the way her pulse quickened when he smiled at her, the way his respect for her opinions made her feel valued in ways she'd never experienced. "I believe we've already established our compatibility in business matters," she said carefully. "But marriage involves considerably more than managing a store together." Samuel stepped closer, hope evident in his eyes. "It does indeed. It involves trust, affection, shared dreams, and mutual support through whatever challenges life might bring." "And you believe we might find those things together?" "I believe we've already begun to find them." Rebecca looked around the store that had become so much more than her inheritance. In these few weeks it had become the foundation for a new life, a new identity, and possibly a new love. "There's something you should know about me, Samuel." "Tell me." "I'm not the biddable sort of woman most men prefer. I have opinions and I express them. I believe in taking risks for principles I hold dear. I may not always be easy to live with." Samuel's smile was tender. "Rebecca, I've spent the last 2 weeks watching you negotiate with miners, charm elderly ladies into trying new products, and face down creditors with polite determination. I know exactly what sort of woman you are, and it's precisely the sort I want to spend my life beside." "Even when I'm being stubborn?" "Especially then." Rebecca felt a smile tug at her lips. "In that case, Mr. Crawford, I believe I would be amenable to proper courtship, with the understanding that any decisions about our future will be made as equal partners." "I wouldn't have it any other way." Samuel reached for her hands, his touch gentle but sure. "May I kiss you, Rebecca?" "I think that would be entirely appropriate, given the circumstances." His kiss was soft at first, tentative, but when Rebecca responded by moving closer, it deepened into something that spoke of genuine feeling and carefully controlled passion. When they finally parted, both were breathing unsteadily. "I should probably escort you back to your boarding house," Samuel said, though he made no move to release her hands. "Probably," Rebecca agreed, though she felt no inclination to hurry the moment along. "Mrs. Patterson will be scandalized if she discovers I've kept you out past 9 o'clock. Mrs. Patterson has been trying to marry me off to every unmarried man in Copper Creek since I arrived. I think she'll make an exception for good news." Samuel laughed. "Is that what this is? Good news?" Rebecca considered the question seriously. 3 weeks ago, she had arrived in Copper Creek expecting to inherit a failing business and an uncertain future. Instead, she had found a community that needed her, work that fulfilled her, and a man who saw her as she truly was, not a spinster to be pitied, but a woman capable of building something meaningful. "Yes," she said firmly, "I believe it is very good news indeed." 6 months later, on a crisp October morning, Rebecca Crawford stood in the church where her father had once worshipped, wearing her mother's pearl necklace and a dress of deep blue silk that complemented her eyes. The store had not only survived but prospered under their joint management, expanding to include fresh goods from local farms and specialty items ordered through their railroad connections. More importantly, the partnership that had begun with desperate necessity had blossomed into something neither had expected to find. Samuel had proven to be exactly the sort of husband he had promised, respectful of her opinions, supportive of her ambitions, and devoted to their shared vision of what life in Copper Creek could become. As he took her hands at the altar, Rebecca reflected on the curious paths that had led them both to this moment. Samuel had come west fleeing failure and seeking redemption. She had come fleeing spinsterhood and seeking independence. Instead, they had found each other, and in doing so, had discovered that the best partnerships were built not on desperation or convenience, but on mutual respect, shared values, and the courage to trust another person with one's dreams. Do you, Rebecca Murphy, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, she said, meeting Samuel's eyes with complete certainty. The kiss that sealed their marriage was witnessed by a church full of neighbors who had watched their courtship with approval and anticipation. As they walked back down the aisle together, Rebecca caught sight of the store through the church windows. Murphy's General Store bore a new sign, Crawford's General Store, established 1887. But more than the name had changed. Under their joint stewardship, it had become exactly what her father had envisioned, not just a place of commerce, but a cornerstone of community life, where people gathered to share news, solve problems, and support one another through the challenges of frontier life. That evening, as they stood together on the porch of their small house behind the store, watching the lights come on in windows throughout Copper Creek, Samuel wrapped his arms around his new wife. "Any regrets about staying in Colorado?" he asked softly. Rebecca leaned back against his chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, breathing in the familiar sense of sage and distant snow that characterized their adopted home. "None whatsoever. This is where we belong, Samuel. This is where we can build something that matters." Together? Always together. Above them, the first stars appeared in the clear mountain sky, and Rebecca knew with certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything else, as equal partners, united in purpose and strengthened by a love that had grown from mutual respect into something deep and enduring. The telegram that had brought her to Copper Creek had promised only debts and difficulties. Instead, it had delivered the foundation for a life richer than any she had dared imagine. Sometimes, Rebecca reflected, the most important journeys began with the most uncertain destinations.